The alien doctors tried to stabilize the human patient. Then his blood triggered a station-wide lockdown. If you ever find yourself in an alien operating room, pray that you do not bleed. To the rest of the galaxy, the scent of human blood is not just a medical emergency. It is an evolutionary nightmare that triggers a station-wide extinction alarm. Pause the morning on Threshold 9 started with the usual low-gravity hum. For Elena, the station's 0.6 G felt like walking through a dream, or perhaps like being a ghost. She was a volunteer nurse, a 32-year-old human who had come to the diplomatic sector because she wanted to see the stars without carrying a rifle. Back on Earth, she had been a trauma surgeon in a city called Volgrad, but here, she was mostly a curiosity. She spent her days checking the hydration levels of the Muchins, those gentle empaths who flinched at loud noises, and ensuring the Gerlach patients had enough hydraulic fluid for their oversized cardiovascular systems. The medical wing was a masterpiece of sterile architecture. The walls were a warm off-white with muted sage green trim, and the lighting was a soft, diffused glow designed to create an artificial calm. It was the kind of place that wanted you to relax, which was always the first thing that worried a human. Elena's supervisor was a T-Velan named Professor Cavalan. He had 4 arms, and his rear pair stayed pressed tight against his thorax whenever Elena moved too quickly. To a T-Velan, human movement was unsettling. Elena moved like still water, displacing almost nothing, every joint in her body absorbing its own impact. It was the movement of a pursuit predator from a high-gravity death world, and no matter how many smiles she gave, the alien staff could feel 10,000 generations of selection pressure in her every step. Pause today was supposed to be a routine day. A maintenance engineer named Miller had been injured in the lower decks. A hydraulic bypass had snapped, a heavy piece of machinery that would have crushed a Muchin or a Velith instantly. Miller had caught the weight with his arms, buying his team enough time to clear the area, but the jagged composite had sliced deep into his shoulder and thigh. He was brought into the surgical suite conscious and remarkably calm. To the alien doctors, Miller was a titan. He was 42 years old, a former logger from the Cascades who weighed over 250 pounds. He was twice the mass of the Valky guards and broader than the T-Velan medical staff. As they prepped him for surgery, Professor Cavalan looked at the monitors and then at Elena. "Your species is remarkably dense," Nurse Cavalan said, his 4 hands moving with practiced efficiency. "The muscle fibers, they seem to be under constant tension. Is it true your home world has a gravity index of 1.0? "It is," Elena said, her voice steady. "The galactic median is 0.6, Cavalan muttered. "I do not understand how you do not simply collapse under your own weight. Everything on your planet must be trying to crush you. We call it home," Elena replied. "You call it a death world." Pause. The procedure began. The initial scans showed Miller's vital signs were elevated but stable. He was in pain, certainly, but his brain was receiving the damage report and choosing to continue normal function. This was something the doctors could not map, the human cognitive architecture characterized by a threat processing speed that rivals dedicated combat species. Humans solve problems under duress. They improvise. They can feel fear and continue to act. They can feel pain and continue to think. Then the first cut was made. It was a standard incision to clear the debris from the shoulder wound. The moment the scalpel breached the skin, the red fluid began to well up. Human blood, startlingly bright red, startlingly vivid against Miller's pale skin, and then the smell hit the room. Pause. Inside every human being, there is a biological warfare network so complex and so violent that it has spent 4 billion years winning an arms race against 1 trillion different enemies. We call it an immune system, but to the rest of the galaxy, it is a nightmare that never sleeps. On Earth, the biosphere contains an estimated 1 trillion distinct microbial species. Humans have survived them not through avoidance, but through an internal biological warfare system of such staggering complexity that it has no parallel in the galactic database. Every second of every day, from birth until death, a human body is not a single organism. It is a battlefield. The instant Miller's blood was exposed to the open air, the molecular signature hit the room like a physical blow. Elena felt her own antenna, a remnant of the Varley species training she'd undergone, go flat against her skull. They were receiving a molecular signature so complex and so violent that it bypassed rational thought and went directly to the part of the brain that handles survival. The signature was iron. Free-floating, hemoglobin-bound iron. The fluid coming out of that human was saturated with the same metal used in industrial smelting, in military hull construction, and in the high-tensile structural alloys that held warship bulkheads together under combat stress. That metal was dissolved in his blood. It was circulating inside his body at high pressure. And now, the molecules were dispersing through the laboratory atmosphere with the easy efficiency of something designed to carry oxygen across a high-gravity world. The reaction in the room was instantaneous. A pylori nurse in the front row, a species with chemoceptor tendrils so sensitive they could taste the composition of a room, went rigid. Her tendrils locked straight out from her skull in a predator proximity alarm. She was unconscious before she hit the floor. Beside her, a Velith technician began vomiting with violent immediacy. His digestive system was rejecting its contents in a panic response triggered by a chemical signature his biology identified as certain death. Professor Cavalan froze. His forearms began to click rapidly, a distress call encoded in his species since before they developed language. It was a sound that meant one thing in every Tivelan dialect across every Tivelan world. Something dangerous is here, it is close, and it is too late to run. The station's intelligence system did not wait for permission to scream. It was not a drill alarm. It was a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through the walls and the synth granite floors, a frequency specifically calibrated to activate the threat recognition pathways of every species on the station simultaneously. Unauthorized biological, hazard detected in Medical Wing Alpha. Classification, active, pathogen index, Apex. The words from the station's AI settled over the ward like a physical weight, the red emergency lighting triggered, bathing the entire ward in a dull, bloody glow. Lockdown protocols were implemented across all adjacent sectors. Doors slammed shut. Magnetic seals engaged. Through the surgical viewing pane, the scene was one of total collapse. The medical staff lay on the floor in various states of shock and physical rejection. Their immune systems, those delicate energy shields, were being dismantled by the mere scent of a human's internal warfare network. Miller, however, did something they did not expect. He sat up. His left shoulder was a mess of red, and his thigh was leaking that iron-rich fluid onto the sterile white floor, but he did not look like a patient anymore. He looked like a pursuit predator who had just spotted his target. Miller, stay down. Elena shouted through the intercom, her own breath coming in short, ragged gasps as she fought the urge to faint. The doc passed out. Elena, Miller said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the speakers. I think I am going to have to finish this myself. He reached for a tube of trauma sealant. It was formulated for T-Velan plasma, but Miller did not care. He squeezed the gel directly into the wound on his shoulder. Elena watched him bite down hard on his lower lip, his thick neck corded with strain. He was not crying out. He was acknowledging the pain, filing it away, and continuing to operate. This matters because we live in a galaxy that has spent 3,000 cycles pretending that conflict does not exist. The Galactic Council prided itself on peace, building civilizations by ignoring the shadows. The humans built theirs by mastering them. The humans had been alone on their world for 200,000 years because everything else either ran from them or tried to kill them. They left their world looking for classmates, not prey. But they brought their warfare network with them just in case. This is the cognitive architecture the galaxy is now forced to contend with. Humans solve problems under duress. They improvise, they can feel fear and continue to act. They can feel pain and continue to think. At the 9-minute mark, the first T-Velan technician groaned. The blue glow in his eyes, the mark of the biomechanical shock, began to fade. He looked up and saw Miller, a massive human covered in his own blood, standing over the surgical table, holding his own shoulder together with industrial adhesive. The technician did not see a patient. He saw a Class 12 death world organism. Pause. When the security team finally breached the doors, they did not find a slaughterhouse. They found a ward full of survivors. And in the center, they found a human male, his gray thermal shirt torn, his hands covered in his own iron-rich blood, looking up at them with the calm, focused expression of someone who had finished one task and was ready for the next. The squad leader, a heavily armored alien who had seen 23 first contacts fold like wet paper, stopped 3 paces from him. He looked at the floor, he looked at the unconscious doctors, and then he looked at Miller, the station-wide alarm. The Apex sent. It was you. The leader asked, his voice a synthesized rumble of disbelief. Miller shrugged, his hands shaking slightly with the fine tremor of an adrenaline crash. It was just a Tuesday, he said. I have had worse Mondays. Pause. That evening, the Academy's Central Species Classification database updated. The field next to human refreshed from pending review to a new designation in bright alert coloring. Class 12. Death World Organism. But beneath that, a single new line appeared, written by an observer who had watched the sensor feeds for 4 hours and 17 minutes in total silence. Recommendation: do not mistake their falling for weakness. They have been falling and getting back up for 300,000 years. We mistook the falling for the end of the story. We never thought to look at what happened next. The Apex lockdown was a warning, one the Galactic Council wrote into its own laws with its own hands so it would never forget. They learned that day that a human body is not just a person. It is a promise. A promise that when the galaxy gets sick, when the predators get too big, and when the silence of death starts to scream, there is one species that will stand in the middle of the bridge and refuse to move. Pause. They do not wait for permission to save people they care about. And they do not need your help to make that decision matter. We have been falling and getting back up for 300,000 years. You mistook the falling for the end of the story. You never thought to look at what happened next. If you want to understand what else humanity is hiding behind that disarming smile, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for the next chapter of the great human underestimation. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you were on Nexus Station that day, would you have evacuated or would you have stayed to see what the human did next? Because the humans are already out here and they are just getting started. Pause. Peace through strength. That is the old human concept. And now, it is the galaxy's new reality. I will see you in the next one. The galaxy believed it had contained the human variable behind magnetic seals and red emergency lights. They were wrong because a human in lockdown is not a prisoner. They are the one deciding when the doors finally open. Pause. The silence that followed the station-wide alarm was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of a predator. On Threshold 9, the red emergency lighting didn't just signal a breach. It illuminated the moment the Galactic Council's beautiful, fragile fantasy died. In the medical ward, 31 species were currently discovering that their evolutionary history had left them completely defenseless against the scent of a single human's internal warfare. Miller sat on the edge of the surgical table, his massive frame hunched over, holding a tube of industrial-grade trauma sealant. His left shoulder was a jagged landscape of torn muscle and exposed iron-rich blood, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't looking for a doctor. He was looking for a way to finish the job. Beside him, the T-Velen medical staff lay in heaps of shimmering gold armor and pale blue skin. Professor Cavalan was twitching in the corner, his forearms clicking in a rhythmic, involuntary distress loop. The Apex alarm was still screaming, a deep vibration that traveled through the synth granite floors, specifically calibrated to activate the survival pathways of every civilized species on the station. But humans aren't civilized by galactic standards. Humans are a Class 12 death world organism that learned to wear a suit and tie. Paulina Brooks, the human volunteer nurse, stood behind the reinforced viewing pane. She could feel her own antenna, a modification she had taken to better serve the diplomatic sector, pressing flat against her skull. Her biological systems were reporting the same threat as everyone else: iron, free-floating, hemoglobin-bound iron. To a Varley, or a Muchin, or even a heavily armored Gerlock, that scent was the smell of extinction. It was the molecular signature of a species that had spent 4 billion years winning an arms race against 1 trillion different enemies. It was a warfare network that never slept. Miller. Elena said through the intercom, her voice steady despite the adrenaline peaking in her system. The station is in total lockdown. The AI has flagged your blood as a Class 12 pathogen. Security is 4 minutes away, and they are coming with containment foam and thermal dampeners. Miller looked up at the camera. He didn't look like a patient. He looked like a logger from the Cascades who had just been told his chainsaw was out of gas. "Then they're coming for the wrong thing," he rumbled. His voice was a deep, gravelly vibration that the station's sensors flagged as percussion-based aggression. "The AI isn't just locking down the ward, Elena. It's cycling the atmosphere. It thinks there's an airborne virus. It's going to vent the ward to cleanse the breach." This is the cognitive architecture the galaxy never accounted for. When an alien species faces an apex-level threat, they surrender to the protocol. They trust the system. Humans, however, problem-solve under duress. They improvise tools from environmental materials. They recognize they are outmatched and choose to engage anyway. Miller didn't wait for the security team. He stood up, his muscles counteracting a gravitational load twice the galactic median. On Earth, the gravity index is 1.0. Here, it was 0.6. To Miller, walking across that room was like moving through a dream. He reached for the heavy steel pipe wrench he'd been using before the accident. It weighed 8 pounds of solid iron. He walked to the primary atmosphere control panel. It was protected by a Class 6 security shell, rated to withstand the grip strength of almost any known species. Miller placed his hand on the panel. Inside his veins, the war was already being won. His white cell mobilization time was faster than a Class 3 battlefield nanite suite. His blood was building a wall across his wounds molecule by molecule. He wasn't thinking about the pain. He was thinking about the 3-millimeter thick rind of a malloc fruit he'd seen a schoolgirl named Lena peel away with her bare fingers. He squeezed. The composite casing of the control panel didn't just crack, it collapsed. Miller tore the interface from the wall, the metal support struts separating with a sound of tearing composite. He wasn't looking for a code. He was looking for the physical fail-safe. AI. Miller commanded, his voice a lethal rasp. "Cancel the atmospheric vent. Redirect the scrubbers to secondary filtration. I am the secondary filter." "Warning," the flat, precise tone of the AI responded. "Biological signature of human engineer is currently hosting a Class 12 conflict. Exposure to ward atmosphere will increase pathogen load by 4,000%. "Do it," Miller growled, "or I'll take this entire bulkhead down with me." The sound of the air shifting was like a city breathing. The red emergency lighting flickered as the AI processed the command. Miller sat back down in the center of the room, cross-legged, the way he might have sat in a forest in Oregon. He took a length of hydraulic tubing meant for a bypass, and with the calm efficiency of a trauma surgeon, inserted it into his own brachial vein. He was using himself as the machine. Pause on Earth, humans survived because they never stopped. They chased things for days. They followed their prey when it ran, when it hid, and when it thought it was safe. They were persistence predators. Miller wasn't winning this war in a burst. He was chasing the apex. Alarm, following the stress signals through his own systems, exhausting the station's fear until it had no choice but to stop. Minutes felt like hours. At the 9-minute mark, the first T-Velan technician groaned. The blue glow in his eyes, the mark of the biomechanical shock triggered by the human scent, began to fade. He looked up and saw Miller, a massive human covered in his own blood, holding a wrench in one hand and a piece of station hardware in the other. The technician didn't see a patient. He saw a Class 12 Death World organism that had just saved the ward by refusing to follow the rules of a peaceful galaxy. Pause when the security team finally breached the doors. They didn't find a slaughterhouse. They found a ward full of survivors. The squad leader, a heavily armored alien who had seen 23 first contacts fold like wet paper, stopped 3 paces from Miller. He looked at the wreckage of the Class 6 panel. He looked at the tubing in Miller's arm. He looked at the iron-rich fluid on the floor. The station-wide alarm. The Apex sent. "It was you?" the leader asked, his synthesized voice cracking with disbelief. Miller shrugged, his hands shaking slightly with the fine tremor of an adrenaline crash. "It was just a Tuesday," he said. "I survived Monday. Everything else is fine." Pause that evening, the reports from Threshold 9 were 91 pages long. Analysts like Belshara, a Velkath who spent hundreds of hours searching for a mistake, found none. The human body had simply performed as designed. The Academy's Central Species Classification database updated that night. The field next to human refreshed from pending review to a new designation in bright alert coloring, Class 12, Death World Organism. But beneath that, a single new line appeared, written by an observer who had watched the sensor feeds for 4 hours and 17 minutes in total silence. Recommendation: do not mistake their falling for weakness. They have been falling and getting back up for 300,000 years. We mistook the falling for the end of the story. We never thought to look at what happened next. Pause. The Apex incident was the reason for the unauthorized entry clause. It was a law written in blood after a Luldran reach, where help arrived 19 hours too late. Humanity told the Council, "If you make us wait again, we will not wait. We will act, and we will deal with the consequences afterward. This matters because we live in a galaxy that has spent 3,000 cycles pretending that conflict doesn't exist. We built a civilization by ignoring the shadows. The humans built theirs by mastering them. They remind us that true peace isn't the absence of a threat. It is the presence of the strength required to stop it." Pause. The next time you see a human volunteer or an engineer like Miller, do not look at their lack of claws. Do not look at their soft skin. Look at the iron in their blood and the war in their veins. They don't wait for permission to save people they care about. And they don't need your help to make that decision matter. Humanity is already out here, and we are just getting started. If you want to understand what else humanity is hiding behind that disarming smile, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for the next chapter of the great human underestimation. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you were on Threshold 9, would you have evacuated, or would you have stayed to see what the human did next? Pause. Because we have been falling and getting back up for 300,000 years. You mistook the falling for the end of the story. You never thought to look at what happened next, peace through strength. That is the old human concept, and now it is the galaxy's new reality. I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.